haven't listened to the episode before this one on the art of questions or why Filipinos ask personal question, go back. In today's episode, you would learn the art of responding to the tita that wants to know when you'll get married, or with your mom who wants to know how much you make per hour, or even to your lola who kept asking why you're not eating enough after your third plate. Are Filipinos truly bilingual? We use the same language at home but speak and love languages foreign to each other, together but separated. Kamusta? I'm Roanne, licensed psychotherapist mom, immigrant twice, first generation Pinoy raising my mixed Filipino-American children in America. I found that after visiting 500 Filipino homes, I continue to be a student of the culture. In this podcast, we would be seatmates in this beautiful cultural classroom. And by the way, did I tell you I need my kaping barako straight from Batangas before each class? If you're interested in learning the deep intricacies of the Filipino culture, especially as it merged with American culture, talks about trauma-informed care and deepening your Filipino relationships across generations, which includes my fave topic, Pinoy love languages, you're in the right place. Today's episode is brought to you by the Masterclass called Pakiramdam. This is called Attunement in Filipino. In this masterclass, only about 2 hours, you would learn the ancestral way that Filipinos speak and express love. Check the link in the bio. Did you know that we are heard in, I believe, 19 different countries, including Germany, Canada, of course, in the motherland, in the Philippines, in Taiwan, at marami pang iba. Thank you if you are wherever you are. Thank you for listening. If you would be so generous to leave a stellar review, if this speaks to you, go ahead and do that. The link is below. And maraming salamat in advance. Kamusta everyone? Another episode of the Pinoy Love Language podcast. This is Roanne. I am in my studio right now thanks to my hubby who is tending to the children so that mama is able to do some podcasting. What is it that you do? Whether you're a mom or you have a very busy career, you're a student, what is it that you do so you can delegate certain things so that you can keep doing what is important to you? And if you don't delegate, why is this difficult for you? Now, let me just recap the previous episode, even though I really highly recommend that you go back in Why Filipinos Ask Personal Questions, the art of questions. There you would learn, and this is a snapshot, that Filipinos ask questions to connect, to gauge, are we in the same circle? Can you get me? Am I too much for you? And so personal questions are used to engage. And the difference with the American culture, or generally the Western culture, that are more task-oriented, we ask questions because there's a reason, not just to connect, but maybe we want to know the agenda. We want to know where we're going. And so when we ask questions, we do expect that there is a response. And thereby, when somebody asks us a question, we expect to also give an answer. If you're following me, there's a huge worldview difference as far as the intention for asking questions. Of course, the caveat is someone might be asking questions and they may be ill intent. And that can be present across culture. So again, in the Pinoy Love Language podcast, we're talking about collective expression and not individual differences, because you are not definable. A label doesn't fit you. And so everything we talk about, and even when you're reading research, everything is about patterns and a collective expression, as what we were talking about today. But going back, why this is important, when you could be more accurate as to what the other person is trying to say, there is less assumption. And imagine if you just see things as they are. We often hear the word trigger. I was triggered. One of the reasons why you might be triggered is from an experience that's usually very unpleasant that had occurred in the past, and the brain is tagging you. It's a pattern matching phenomena where it's telling you, alert, alert, alert. It's either duck or fight, right? For some people, this is the fight or the flight, but also there is this overcompensating. There's another strategy that some people use, which they might overcompensate and almost like selling their propriety, right? And so they become other people's label. So why the art of responding is very important is then whatever you heal, when you could understand and you could be more clear, then it doesn't follow you. You might have heard me before say, what we don't transform, you transmit. So if you think that you could run away from unprocessed things, you may be able to get away from that if you are able to process it in just different outlets. So, example, if you have issues with your mom, some people might have processed that, but they process it maybe doing art or like some creative outlet or expression. I think that's quite possible. However, if there are remnants of that, or if unprocessed at all, what you would find is whatever you don't transform keeps following you. It keeps following you in the workplace. It keeps following you in your romantic relationships, in your relationship with your children. So in many ways, even if you deny it or you think you're moving away from it, it's moving towards you. So anything that you hate, any extreme polarities, whether it's extreme attachment or love or hate, they usually come from the same theme of either trying to avoid something or moving away, which is the same. You're trying to, either humans are trying to move towards something pleasurable or away from pain. That's why learning the art of responding can potentially not only change your relationships, but your relationship with yourself, because it would give you a very different experience than the one you've been having before. Because if you respond or react in the same way, how would you have a different experience? So insight, people often go to coaching or therapy because I want to gain insight. But without movement and without giving yourself a different corrective experience, a different one from the one that you've had, insight is just good information. And then what else? You might find yourself stuck again. Let's go back to the art of responding. It's very important that before entering spaces, that you begin to learn or reframe the meaning for questions, okay? Just think about it. It's really used to connect. Now, I talk about don't enter potlucks with a shield in your hand, but don't also think that you may never need it. You could just pack it away in your car. So you're not really thinking that it's something you might need, but just in case you have it there, because boundaries, healthy boundaries are important. And as you're listening to me, there's no encouragement that you just allow people to say things that may not sit well with you and that it's fine and dandy and you just leave with an open wound. That's not what I mean. That's why you need your shield, because there are people who are ill intent. And then when you meet them, then you have the comfort that you do have a shield in your car. But for the most part, don't bring it with you, because when you have a shield, everything else would look like a spear. So reframe the meaning for asking questions. Right now, you can practice this in your body, okay? Notice that if you have a favorite quote and unquote, air quotes, tita, and she likes to ask you questions that you find offensive, you can begin to just practice. Looking at tita, she opens the door and she's asking you questions and she's all smiles. Maybe you could imagine that her body, rather than it's red, which meaning she's trying to offend, you can assign any color. It's actually blue. That she's really trying to connect. And probably she's just tactless and she does need a lesson or two on her ways of connecting. But you're not responsible for this. So don't put it in your bag. Okay, don't carry this. This is not your responsibility, but hers. Your responsibility is just the art of responding. So notice that. Notice, practice, tita trying to connect with you. Notice that assigning a color, whatever that might be for you, for her trying to engage. As you do that, as you're listening to me, notice how that feels in your body. Oh, she's trying to connect with me. Oh, she did invite me in the first place. This is what I was saying about your shield in the car. Trust that if someone goes overboard or does not honor your privacy, that you will know what to do. Now, if you don't, because you're probably like, no, but I don't know what to do. So that's why I'm setting rigid boundaries for myself. Trust yourself. Give yourself a couple of options and don't doubt yourself. So if that happens, I could do a couple of things, but do it more from a neutralized emotional stance. Notice how saying these two statements could feel very differently. Okay, number one, ay nako. You know what that means, right? Ay nako. If tita asks me if I am ready to have a baby, I'm just going to leave and never speak to her again, right? So that's your option one. Option two would be, well, if tita asks me and keeps asking me a question that I'm not comfortable with, I could just thank her for hosting the party and just keep moving. The way you prepare also influence the way you would interact or how you would feel entering your potlucks. So trust yourself, prepare, give yourself a couple of options, and don't doubt yourself. Now, one of the reasons why people feel a surge of anger is when they feel powerless, like when you see yourself small, like you can't control things. So when you don't feel you have control or you can escape the situation, you might feel the surge of anger. That's why it's important to give yourself a couple of options so that when you enter spaces, you don't feel like if things go awry, which expect that they won't, but if they do, that you have an escape route. Then you would feel less angry because you are empowering yourself with these options. Now, let me talk about intent, okay? Perhaps the intent of tita is not to offend you, okay? So the intent is not ill, but the outcome for you is. The interpretation that you have, the meaning, makes you feel ill. Again, you can't change tita or lola or mom. And if you have a pattern you notice, you could keep saying, this is an option for you. Like, well, it's them. It's them that needs to change. And they probably do. But if you see that this affects you or influence you, and you see similar patterns in your workplace, in your romantic relationships, if you're a parent, even the way you approach school, if you're procrastinating, there's probably something, some work that needs to be done also in your own space. The art of responding is empowering you. When you learn how to respond, you give yourself a different experience. And sometimes if you give yourself a different experience at work, you'll notice that you're practicing there, but it can also give you the real rehearsal for the family of origin stuff, or vice versa. It is hardest, I think, in your family of origin, because sometimes we are most triggered. It's like this fire, and if you're too close to the fire, you can get burned. But it's even more important to practice, to give yourself a different and a corrective experience. What you would find is that suddenly it influences you in all aspects of your life. You used to think, oh, I need to fix my relationship with my partner. I have to be a better parent. Oh my gosh, my coworker drives me crazy. It's too overwhelming when usually the core issue comes from the same root cause. And just excavating and finding the root cause, it allows, if you're thinking of a plant, if you're taking care of the roots, it takes care of all the other branches. Suddenly, it starts to blossom. Suddenly, the leaves are greener. When we come back, I'm going to give you specific suggestions, recommendation on the art of responding. Please stick around. Dyan ka lang. Thank you for listening. Again, this episode is brought to you by Pakiramdam. This is the ancestral way that Filipinos speak and express love. If you want to go deeper in the nuances of the culture to really strengthen your cultural identity, check out the Masterclass on Pakiramdam, Attunement, the unique ways Filipinos seek and express love. Check out the link. Hello friends, I'm so glad you're still there. And as you know, I like going straight to the point. I am going to give you, I think I have 5 or 6 ways on how to respond to tita, to lola. Very important. The most important part is to reframe. To reframe that they are trying to connect. Everything branches from this. Number 1, ask another question. If tita asks you, when are you going to have a baby? Ask her, when is she going to have hers? And I tell you, when you could respond in this way and you make each other laugh, they forget about the question. I used to, as you already know, my work is like going into Filipino homes, hundreds of Filipino homes, and I get asked gazillion questions. But ask another question is a very good recommendation. Number 2 is use humor. Be light-hearted. And that really begins with understanding why someone is asking you a personal question. Use humor. When I used to do a lot of visits, people would ask me where I live, and I just use humor. I'd say, bakit Mr. So-and-so? Magpapadala ba kayo ng regalo sa akin? So that means, why? Are you gonna send me a big gift? And using humor, and then you start to laugh. And the conversation starts or keeps going, because what you would notice is they're simply using that as a way to connect. So we did ask another question, use humor. Number 3, use exaggeration. So I think this is in line with humor, but if someone asks you, when are you going to have a baby? You say, tomorrow. And then you both laugh. And then you both understand that you're taking the question lightly. And then you begin to connect. And then people just continue to move on. It's when you get stuck with the question that you both get stuck. Number 4 is to use tita as the gatekeeper. If there's really tita who may like to gossip, and that may be the case, and she really irritates you, you can use her as the gatekeeper. You can actually share a little information about tita. And if this is okay with you, if this speaks to you, tell her something that seem important and tell her not to share it. And of course, use your own discretion. Be honest and truthful with yourself with things that okay for you to share with her. What you might be surprised with is that tita would really appreciate that she's like a confidant. Now, of course, you do this if this sits well with you. Then you might be surprised that she might even be protective of you and your information. So that's number 4. Again, ask another question, use humor, use exaggeration, use tita as the gatekeeper, or ask someone close to tita to be the gatekeeper. Like if it's your mom, talk to mom about, well, I'm really uncomfortable because, tita keeps asking me some weird questions I rather not answer. Talk to someone who is credible to tita so that person can share with tita, Joanne really wants to be here, but she feels, uncomfortable with that question. Do you mind no one else asked that question? So instead of like talking about tita, you're actually making her like the gatekeeper for that. So ask someone close to tita to tell her, like you're like the gatekeeper. If number 4, using tita or talking to tita directly doesn't sit well to you, then finally get to know tita more. When you get to know people's story, their struggle, why they behave a certain way, usually we assume less about them and we become more compassionate. I wonder which one of these, and I'll do a quick recap, would you try? I really encourage you to try one or a few of them, and it's really doing it for yourself because you're allowing yourself a corrective emotional experience so that you don't keep seeing it showing up not just in potlucks. I think this is the misconception, but everywhere else. Here's the recap. Ask another question. Use your humor. Be lighthearted. Use exaggeration. Use tita as the gatekeeper. Talk to her directly. Or ask someone close to tita to be the gatekeeper. Finally, get to know tita more. I hope I've served you well today. Don't forget to use the art of responding. If you feel stuck in your relationships, don't hesitate to speak to a professional, or you can also consult with me one-on-one. The link to schedule that is in the show notes. Maraming salamat for listening at sa uulitin.